Number 5. Operation Popeye. You've probably heard of such conspiracy theories as how the CIA sprays the skies with chemtrails and has a satellite that can trigger earthquakes wherever they aim it. They are just two of the widespread conspiracy theories about how the CIA controls Mother Nature, but there is at least one documented instance where they did indeed modify the weather. Operation Popeye, also known as Operation Intermediary or Operation Compatriot, was a top-secret campaign of weaponized weather modification during the Vietnam War, from March 20, 1967 until July 5, 1972. The intent of Operation Popeye was to extend the monsoon season over North Vietnamese and Viet Cong resupply routes throughout Southeast Asia, particularly the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Operation Popeye was a large and long-running operation that successfully manipulated weather by seeding clouds via aircraft, with silver and lead iodide. On average, they were able to extend the monsoon season 30 to 45 days. Operation Popeye first came to public light in March 1971 by a reporter named Jack Anderson, who published a story based on a secret 1967 memo from the Joint Chiefs of Staff to President Johnson. Melvin Laird, who was Secretary of Defense at the time, denied that the U.S. was modifying the weather in Vietnam. But by 1974, the press stories led to demands from members of the U.S. Congress for more information. U.S. House and Senate resolutions in favor of banning environmental warfare were passed as Senate Resolution 71 on July 11, 1973. Number 4. The Heart Attack Gun. Mary Embree, who began her career in the CIA as a secretary in the Audio Surveillance Division, before being promoted to the Technical Services Department, says she was asked to research a poison that would induce a heart attack in its victim but would be undetectable in a post-mortem. Embree's research led to the development of a top-secret weapon known as the heart attack gun. It involved the freezing of shellfish toxin mixed with water to form a frozen dart which would then be fired from the heart attack gun. Once inside the body, the poison would then dissolve into the person's bloodstream and cause a heart attack. In 1975, CIA Director William Colby presented the weapon at a Church committee hearing, chaired by Senator Frank Church. The heart attack gun was a handgun with a sight affixed to the top, had a battery in the handle, and used electricity to fire a dart. Colby told the committee that the weapon was capable of firing a dart which could enter the body without perception. The only way of knowing that the person had been shot by the weapon was the presence of a tiny red dot at the point of entry. Colby also claimed that the poison would not show up in the autopsy. The official cause of death would, therefore, be deemed a heart attack. The weapon was developed in order to allow the CIA to commit assassinations that could never be traced back to them. Number 3. Canadian Fruit Machine. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police used a machine to detect if a person was gay or not. This was in an attempt to eliminate homosexuals from the Canadian military, police and civil service. The specific machine, dubbed the Fruit Machine, was invented by Dr. Robert Wake, a Carleton University psychology professor. The Canadian government considered all homosexual public servants to be a threat to national security for various absurd reasons, so a special team was formed. Section A3's sole mission was to identify and dismiss from service every homosexual working for the Canadian government. Identified homosexuals were immediately fired or forced to resign. Initial efforts included following people around and undercover work at various clubs, but this proved to be extremely costly and somewhat inefficient, so Section A3 decided they needed a new plan, a way to screen every employee directly. This new plan was the Fruit Machine. People were first led to believe that the machine's purpose was to rate stress. The Fruit Machine primarily used the pupil area response test as an indicator of a person's sexual orientation, as well as perspiration levels and pulse rate. They'd be shown various images, some completely mundane, while others depicted naked or semi-naked photos of women and men. If the subject's pupils dilated when being shown erotic photos of people of the same gender, she or he was assumed to be homosexual. Besides the science behind the machine being completely flawed, there were other problems as well. For instance, each photograph changed the amount of light hitting the person's eyes. Eventually the program for trying to root out homosexuals was abandoned by the Canadian government, but not before at least 400 people lost their jobs. Number 2. Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods is a declassified government document drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the Kennedy administration. The document called for the CIA and other agencies to commit false flag acts of terror on its own citizens and then blame it on Cuba as justification for America to enter a war with communist Cuba. The document reads, "The desired resultant from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government of Cuba and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere." Some other parts of the documents included getting aircraft from Eglin Air Force Base that would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civilian registered aircraft. Besides hijackings, many false flag events such as bombings and attacks on American cities were proposed in this document. Operation Northwoods was authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff but then rejected by President John F. Kennedy. Operation Northwood is a very little-known proposal, and is highly relevant today. It provides a crucial backdrop to the murderous mindset of those whom Castro and Kennedy had angered. Moreover, we would be foolish to assume that the basic nature of institutions has changed. The temptation to engineer so-called false flag events may simply be too great to resist. So it is no surprise that many Americans do not trust their government when it assures them it was caught completely unawares by the 9/11 attacks. Because past is prologue, we would do well to learn the particulars of Northwoods. Number 1. Operation Mockingbird. In an era of fake news and revelations of Facebook sharing user information to outside sources in an apparent attempt to influence voters for elections, the veracity of what we see in the media is more crucial than ever. However, it is far from a new phenomenon, as the CIA's Operation Mockingbird spent years planting fake news stories in an effort to sway public opinion. Operation Mockingbird was an alleged large-scale program within the CIA to manipulate news media for propaganda purposes. The program is thought to have been born out of the CIA's forefather, the Office for Strategic Services, which existed from 1942 to 1947. A primary function of Operation Mockingbird was to cover up covert and often illegal foreign operations, including the 1954 overthrowing of the democratic government of President Arbenz in Guatemala. The operation also helped cover up the overthrowing of the democratic Iranian government in 1953, Operation Ajax. One of the first discoveries of the covert motives of Operation Mockingbird occurred in 1967, when an article reported that the National Student Association received funding from the CIA. Throughout the next decade, several investigations would probe the CIA's ties with the news media. In February 1976, CIA Director and eventual U.S. President George H.W. Bush announced a restrictive policy, effective immediately. CIA will not enter into any paid or contractual relationship with any full-time or part-time news correspondent accredited by any U.S. news service, newspaper, periodical, radio or television network or station. Although it's been several decades later, some theorists believe that the program has never officially discontinued, positing that the consolidation of the multinational for-profit corporate media has created the new Mockingbird. In today's world of fake news and with social media websites selling user information to manipulate an increasingly wary public, it's hard to ignore the parallels with today's allegations of media propaganda.